So just to introduce myself again, I am Associate Professor Wei-Peng Teo from Nanyang Technological University. I reside at the National Institute of Education, and currently I am Deputy Director for the Science of Learning and Education Center. So for those of you who have got any questions about my research or my presentation, or is interested in what we do at the center, please feel free to send me an email or please get in touch with Sophie. She has my contact details, for which I'm very happy for you to share with. So the topic of my talk today is a little bit different from what I had initially proposed. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do here in Singapore at the National Institute of Education, specifically around the science of learning, and of course in the context of education. So my talk will be entitled Educational Neuroscience, Application of Hyperscanning in Education Research. And I will sort of present some data that we are sort of working on at the moment, and also potentially highlight what or how we can use hyperscanning and multimodal data to inform educational research. Presentation, I'm going to do a bit of a PR for my center. So I'm from the Science of Learning and Education Center. And then as the name suggests, we are a center that looks at how we can improve learning and teaching through various methods. And we incorporate things like neuroscience, psychology, cognitive science, technology, and physiology to understand learning in the context of education. We do focus very heavily on using quantitative methods and physiological methods to understand learning. And we also have got postgraduate programs in this space as well. And we are the only center of such nature within Southeast Asia, and I believe only one of two centers within the Asian region. Okay, so what sort of approach do we take here at the Science of Learning and Education Center? We focus on three phases of translation. Admittedly, we do a lot more work within the early experimental and basic phase. But moving forward this year and hopefully the next few years, we are looking at translating a lot of the very basic experimental design work that we have done into something that is scalable and practical. So this is sort of the trajectory that we take. And again, if you have any interest in this area of neuroscience translation and implementation, I'll be very happy to have a chat with you, and let's see if we can establish some collaborations. Okay, so what are we going to discuss today, or what are we going to talk about today? Or at least what I'm going to try and do today is to explain a little bit about what educational neuroscience is and how it contributes to education research. I will talk a little bit about what hyperscanning is, and I believe most of you by now would know what hyperscanning is. There have been a lot of excellent talks before mine. And I believe a lot of you here also use hyperscanning as part of your research, so it's nothing new to you. I use it as one of many different methods to understand learning. I'm also very much learning from you guys as you are from me. I will present some case studies of how we are using hyperscanning in experimental settings and potentially in some real-world examples. And lastly, of course, what are some implications for teaching and learning and opportunities and challenges for the future? Okay, so what is educational neuroscience? When people ask me this question, they always say that educational neuroscience is merely just cognitive neuroscience, right? And while that is somewhat true, it is also not just cognitive neuroscience. Educational neuroscience is more of an interdisciplinary field of research And it encompasses things like educational psychology and also pedagogical sciences or learning sciences in some parts of the world. So what this really is that it uses pedagogical understandings, it uses educational foundations to guide neuroscience in a way that it helps to understand learning in the context of education. And you can argue that, well, education can be anywhere, right? I mean, even you're at home, you can also receive education. Well, this is very true. Education is something that is very structured, and especially if we are delivering education to the general public, it needs to be very scalable and it needs to be very practical as well. So in terms of educational neuroscience, there is an added element of having that practicality and scalability when we do our research. And that is something that we will always have to consider, especially when we are trying to convince teachers or to convince parents that educational neuroscience actually works. So this is what we believe educational neuroscience to be. And so what is the goal for educational neuroscience over here? Educational neuroscience really aims to fill the gap between lab-based brain research and the classroom, right? So if you imagine what you do in the lab, everything is very controlled, everything is very clean. You control for head movements, you control for the environment, you control for the participants' demographics and characteristics. But when you go into an actual classroom, all these control actually becomes almost redundant, right? So how do we fill this gap between what we know in the lab and also what we experience and observe in the classroom, right? So it explores how neural mechanisms that underpin learning can help to inform curriculum design and of course teaching strategies as well. So ultimately, every teacher in the classroom or every parent would want to know how can we best teach the child how to learn a skill or how to learn information and how to apply that information. And this is something that what educational neuroscience is trying to do. It's trying to deliver rigorous lab-based methodologies and applying them into a very messy environment such as the classroom. Okay, so how does it contribute to education? Neuroscience in itself, or educational neuroscience, have contributed to education in many different ways, right? So, of course, the most important, or at least the most well-researched area would be in the area of attention, memory, self-regulation, and motivation. And you would see that there are a lot of papers that sort of focus on these factors, right? The individual factors. Behaviors in the classroom. How do we motivate students to learn better or to learn more, right? And to create lifelong learners. So all these have been researched quite well, and we do see that educational neuroscience has contributed significantly in this space. Another area as well that have been very well researched is to look at individual learning differences and difficulties. So conditions such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, neurodevelopmental delays, these are all areas that obviously would impact and affect learning and trajectories of learning. And educational neuroscience have provided a lot of information around some of these differences in learning abilities, right? So again, this is one area that we see educational neuroscience contributing significantly towards understanding learning differences. Lastly, as well, educational neuroscience looks at the effects of personalized interventions and learning. So again, there are several interventions that have worked in younger learners and older learners, and educational neuroscience have provided the evidence for it. So we can see that educational neuroscience so far have influenced education in many different ways. And these are the three, I would say, top ways in which neuroscience have provided evidence for, and it will continue to do so. Another aspect in which educational neuroscience have provided or contributed to education is that it has provided a lot of shared theoretical frameworks. So in terms of neuroscience, we obviously obviously understand things like cognitive load theory, information processing theory, embodied cognition, dual coding theory. So these are all theories that sort of spawn from psychology or cognitive science or cognitive neuroscience. And they have been adapted into education per se. And it's sort of seemed to have worked fairly well. There are a lot of educational theories that are sort of based on some of these initial psychological theories, and they seem to fit very well, right? So again, neuroscience has contributed to education by providing some of its theoretical frameworks that educational contexts are based on, and there are many more evidence for it, right? So these are only just some of the theories that I can sort of think of at the spur of the moment. And whilst we understand that neuroscience have provided a lot of benefits for education, there's still a lot of there's still a gap that we have to try and bridge, right? So in this publication over here by Brewer in 1997, it's entitled "Education and the Brain," a bridge too far. So essentially, back in 1997, there was this disconnect between neuroscience and education, in a sense that there's this bridge there's this gap that is too far for neuroscience to bridge into education, right? And at that time, and rightly so as well, it was probably because there was a lack of proper translational framework, right? So it is very difficult at that point of time to translate theoretical sort of academic type of research into very complex classroom environments. And I think this is something that we are still struggling to try and achieve. It is also very difficult to translate neuroscience concepts into teaching and learning strategies, right? So again, this is something that a lot of people in education struggle to grasp. So they struggle to actually understand the basis of neuroscience, and they struggle to understand how to effectively apply some of these strategies into their classrooms. So the direct application of neuroscience into the classroom at that time was probably still very premature. And even at that time as well, basic brain science or neuroscience research was very reductionist in nature and very often misinterpreted, right? So again, at that time, there was a lack of knowledge from both sides, from as a neuroscientist or as an educator, to understand each other. So again, I think whilst neuroscience has provided a lot of foundation for education, the translation of neuroscience into education is still a very hot topic and a very debatable subject. So one of the things that we are trying to do here and now, and I think there are labs across the world as well that are trying to do this, is to really see how we can bridge that gap, right? Is it really too far a gap that we see between neuroscience and education that we can't bridge it? Or is that gap becoming smaller and smaller? Okay, so to answer that question, I think there is now very clear evidence that that gap is actually reducing, right? So I'm not saying that there's no gap whatsoever, but I think in today's context, with new technology, with new knowledge, and with new experimental techniques, we are getting closer to a real-world experimental classroom, right? So I believe most of you would have seen this paper. Suzanne Dicker in 2017 published this wonderful piece of work, which I still use to today. And this is probably one of the first few papers, or maybe even the first paper, to actually use a neuroscience technique or EEG, scalable EEG, in real life classrooms, right? So based on what she's published, we now know that we can actually measure neurological signals or neural markers, neural biomarkers in the classroom effectively. And those markers can actually tell us a thing or two of how the class is running, right? So based on this first paper, we know that interbrain synchrony or brain-to-brain synchrony can predict classroom engagement, which I think is now very well known in the hyperscanning world. Brain-to-brain synchrony also reflects the classroom's social dynamic as well. So how do people actually get along with each other, or how do students actually get along with each other? Synchrony is also influenced by both the teaching stimulus and individual differences as well. So how you teach your class, how engaging the classroom is, or how engaging students to students affects the level of synchrony. And it also shows that hyperscanning in naturalistic environments is actually very feasible and can actually provide the teacher with valuable information about how the class is, right? So I think based on this study itself, it has sort of spawned a lot of different studies to actually try to understand how classroom dynamics is enacted and how we can use this information to better plan for teaching and also plan for learning as well. So what does interbrain synchrony represent in the classroom? So as I've mentioned earlier on, I think one of the key characteristics or one of the key markers of interbrain synchrony is social engagement. We now know that through many different experiments, and we have done some work on this as well, is that interbrain synchrony or IBS is a very strong predictor of social engagement, meaning that the stronger your social bond is with that person or social relationship with that person, the better or the higher that synchrony value is or that coherence value is. Synchrony also reflects a cognitive alignment or shared understanding, right? So if we are both focused on something together and we are thinking about the same things, it is quite likely that we both share that engagement level and that understanding, and also share that synchrony as well, right? So again, shared alignment and shared understanding will lead to increased synchrony. Now, this obviously have got implications for teaching as well, right? So we know that with increased brain synchrony, it is a very good predictor of increased learning outcomes as well, and potentially also increase classroom engagement as well, right? So again, some of these biomarkers that we collect in real life classrooms can actually help to predict or can actually help to plan for how a classroom can be enacted. Lastly as well, interbrain synchrony can actually tell us something about the learning environment, right? So it can tell us how interactive is the teacher's teaching style, whether the teacher is interactive or whether the teacher is sort of just regurgitating information to the student, right? We also see that it can help to measure or it can help to predict group dynamics as well. So can we use interbrain synchrony measures to establish optimal group dynamics by pairing students or putting students into groups whereby they can sync well with each other. And of course, collaborative physical classroom engagement as well. So we plan classrooms, how can we design classrooms such that, or plan lessons such that we can raise the level of brain synchrony as students engage with each other. And essentially, I think what we're trying to do over here within the classroom is that we are trying to bring every student, including the teacher, to the same wavelength as each other. Okay, so if we know that being collaborative is important in the classroom and that interbrain synchrony is sort of driving some of these collaboration, or whether collaboration drives synchrony, then one of the key questions that we ask ourselves here in Singapore is how then can we improve this collaboration effort, right? So there are many sort of studies at the moment, I would say potentially in a lab-based environment that have shown that different parameters of collaboration, or if we tweak certain things about the collaboration, it can help to improve collaborative outcomes, and it can help to improve interbrain synchrony as well. Here in Singapore, we use a lot of learning sciences principles to understand how designing different classrooms or different teaching pedagogies can also help stimulate interbrain synchrony. So the three things that we have done initially as our first sort of foray into hyperscanning is to look at how students prepare their assignments, if we were to provide students with information about their assignment beforehand, or if we provide students information about what other students are doing, or if we manipulate the way students collaborate with each other, will that lead to better brain synchrony outcome and hence also better learning outcomes? So these are some of the things that we have done, right? So I'm going to sort of talk about three different ways in which we can manipulate collaboration in a sense of education. The first way that we do is through individual preparation. The second way that I'm going to discuss is about group awareness. And lastly, the concept of collaboration versus cooperation, right? So these are the three things that we actually do a lot in education, but we don't really know a lot about how it affects the way that we collaborate. Okay, so in terms of learning sciences, these three constructs have been researched quite a lot from a behavioral point of view. From a neuroscience perspective, it is less researched. So what is individual preparation? So individual preparation is just the process of, I will give you some time before the actual task to seek out information, to learn about what you need to learn. And then when you come into the collaborative process, you already have some knowledge about what you're trying to study or what you're trying to collaborate on, right? So this is a phase of which you prepare yourself individually for this dual collaborative purposes. The second construct of group awareness is that if we are all collaborating with each other, and if I know what you're doing and you know what I'm doing, do we then, when we collaborate and when we get together and collaborate with each other, will that then raise the level of collaboration, and also will that raise the level of brain synchrony, right? And the third construct over here is the construct of collaboration versus cooperation, right? So there is a subtle difference between, actually a big difference between what collaboration means and what cooperation means. So collaboration over here is that two people work on a problem together. So meaning to say, if both, if we need to start from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, both of you will work on what step 1 is, and then move together to step 2, and then move together to step 3. Cooperation, on the other hand, could be that I will take half of the assignment and you take the other half of the assignment, and at the end, we will put the assignments together, right? So that from a conceptual point of view, there is a very big difference between collaboration versus cooperation over here, right? But we do this both in education. In a natural environment, we collaborate sometimes, but we also cooperate sometimes as well, right? And it just helps to make things move along quicker. So in order to better understand some of these constructs in education, we sort of designed an experiment. This was actually part of a funded project whereby we were able to secure 39 dietes, 35 males, 43 females, with a mean age of 25.6. So these are mostly university students. And we measured, apart from the behavioral collaboration effort, we also measured from the prefrontal cortex over here, as you can see where the receptors and transmitters are, and also from the right TPJ, or right temporal parietal junction. And as we all know from the past presentations, these are the two areas that are most involved with social elements or social neuroscience. So therefore, we have also chosen to focus on these two areas as well. So in terms of the setup or the design that we have done, what we've gotten the pairs of participants to do is these 5 conditions over here. So we started them off with a control condition whereby this is essentially, I mean, it's sort of a competition, but this is more of an individual type of work whereby there is no collaboration happening. So we put the two dyads separately. We measured the brain responses whilst they just solve a problem. All right. So the problem that we gave them was sort of an open-ended problem. It could be things like, please design a bookshelf that has, that is able to hold something, right? So these are general questions for our participants. Then what we do is that we move into 4 different conditions that includes collaboration or cooperation. So we have a collaboration condition only, whereby there's no other manipulations. And all these conditions go on for 5 minutes. This one over here is collaboration with 2 minutes of individual preparation beforehand as well. So before they sort of collaborated with each other, we gave them 2 minutes of individual time to prepare the materials. And then when they collaborate, they can sort of access the materials. The 4th condition over here was group awareness. So this was very similar to IP, but in this case, both participants could actually see what the other participant is trying to do, right? So we give them the opportunity to observe what the other party is trying to do. And bearing in mind as well that these dyads were strangers to each other, they don't know each other, but they were sort of matched for in terms of the academic background, and also the genders as well. So we got them same genders to sort of collaborate with each other. And the last condition over here was a cooperation condition only, right? So these were the 4 conditions that we sort of tried to do. And what did we find? So essentially, if we were to, so again, I'm just going to show you where we've measured from. The numbers over here indicate the different channels, obviously, that the transmitter and receiver pairs form. So we have 10 channels in the front, in the prefrontal cortex, 10 channels in the right TPJ region, and we use a non-parametric Wilcoxon sign rank test to determine differences between the WTC values, the coherence values. And what we found over here, so the first comparison that we made was, how does collaboration compare with competition or individual or just individually doing the task, right? So over here, what we see is that if we were to compare the different channels with each other, we would find that in the prefrontal cortex, channels 1, 2, 3, 8, 10. So essentially, it's sort of this region over here with sort of this region over here, indicating the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and also the inferior frontal gyrus. These channels were significantly different or significantly higher in your coherence values during the collaboration as compared to competition, right? And for the RTPJ as well, channels 11, 12, 14, 15. So 11, 12, 14, 15. So areas that sort of demarcate where the right TPJ is, the coherence values were significantly higher during collaboration as compared to competition, right? So again, I think this is something that has been established in the literature. We know that if we were to collaborate versus a control condition, we would sort of expect that the coherence, the interbrain synchrony in those two areas would be significantly greater. Now, if we were to compare IP or individual preparation and collaboration, what we find that only the prefrontal cortex, in particular channel 1, 2, and 3, were significantly greater in coherence value in the IP plus collaboration condition over just collaboration only, right? So if we look at now including an individual preparation component, what we do see is that only the prefrontal cortex showed a greater synchrony value. And this was also the same for group awareness as well. So it seems like if we were to provide an additional stimulus of individual preparation and group awareness, that we see the prefrontal cortex being more or having greater levels of synchrony compared to just collaboration alone. Of course, if we were to compare GA, this is meant to be individual preparation. I do apologize for this error. So if we were to compare group awareness and individual preparation together, there is no difference in terms of, or there's no change in brain synchrony or coherence values. Now, interestingly, when we look at collaboration versus cooperation, right, what we actually see here is that instead of now the prefrontal cortex showing more coherence, we are actually seeing that the right TPJ showing more coherence in this case, right? So what this sort of tells us is that by manipulating how we present information to our participants, we are able to stimulate, or we are able to cause coherence from different parts of the brain to differ, right? Some might be in the prefrontal cortex, some might be in the TPJ, which is probably a bit more social, more linked to social constructs. So again, I think this is this is sort of good evidence to sort of suggest that by manipulating how we teach and how we present information, it has a significant effect on how people collaborate with each other and how it affects brain synchrony between two people, or at least within a group. So what are some implications then for teaching and learning? We have to recognize that learning is a very social endeavor. It's very much like exercise as well. That synchrony supports engagement, and the use of interactive learning and allowing face-to-face interaction is actually important for learning to take place, right? Teaching styles also affect our brain alignment. We probably need a various or different teaching styles and more engaging type of teaching styles to cause interaction among students, so that students, if they are paired together, are able to co-regulate their learning with each other as well. Shared attention equals shared understanding. So by being able to capture somebody's attention collectively, we are able to then teach more effectively, and students are able to understand more effectively as well. Social closeness enhances learning outcomes as well. So therefore, building a positive relational culture is important, right? So again, this is important as teachers to actually develop positive teaching environments for children, especially children who maybe have got learning dispositions, right, or learning disadvantages. Emotion and motivation also modulates neural engagement. Therefore, things like being able to set realistic goals, being able to foster intrinsic motivation is important for this sort of neural engagement to happen. Okay, so what are some opportunities and challenges that we face so far, right? So I think this is probably something that we are sort of moving into now that we sort of know through obviously other groups' work and even some of the data that we've collected so far. We now want to sort of extend the way that we are capturing our data. That's one, but also trying to make sense of how we can pair neural data with other behavioral and physiological data as well. So one of the things that we are embarking on at the moment, and we are sort of midway through some data collection that we have, is to sort of use a multimodal data analytical approach to understand learning, right? So again, using a hyperscanning paradigm, but in this case, what we are trying to do is that we are collecting a lot of different types of data, which includes things like eye tracking. We look at heart rate variability. We are looking at facial gesture recognition. We are looking at voice recording as well, how they are communicating with each other, to sort of predict learning outcomes. And one thing that we are trying to do over here is obviously to use different machine learning techniques to therefore understand how all these different variables actually come into play with each other, right? So again, learning is not just sort of one-sided, it is sort of multifaceted. It is influenced by many different things. And therefore, we believe that by using multiple sources of data, we are able to better predict what the outcome of learning can be. And this is something that's, so based on some preliminary data that we've got, this was actually a very recent publication. It was actually accepted just early this month. That we were sort of able to use multiple data sources to sort of predict individuals' cognitive load whilst they sort of are doing a learning task. And if we were to combine some of these, if we were to combine different physiological data together, the accuracy of this prediction through machine learning models is actually greatly increased. So so if you look over here, in this paper, what we've done is we've used several different algorithms. The random forest model seems to be able to predict with a fairly high accuracy, precision, and recall. And what we have done is that if we were to pair, let's say, eye tracking data with FNIRS data, this prediction value over here of prediction of cognitive load is actually significantly greater than either FNIRS or just eye tracking data alone, right? So again, what this sort of highlights to us is that by now incorporating or amalgamating different data sources, we are able to better and more holistically understand how learning is generated in a naturalistic environment. And we can do this, we can now do this with obviously advanced techniques, portable systems, and advanced algorithms to help us predict outcomes. So therefore, in conclusion, is the bridge still too far for us to bridge neuroscience and education? I guess there are 4 points over here that I would like to very quickly go through, is that we now have technological progress, whereby equipment is becoming more portable, more user-friendly, and more cost-effective. We have conceptual maturity, so therefore we have greater acceptance of education neuroscience by educators, and neuroscientists are also now beginning to accept education research as a mainstream form of research. We do have evidence-based relevance now, so we know that biological data collected in real time can be predictive of things like engagement, motivation, and cognitive load. And of course, lastly, interdisciplinary collaboration is now happening a lot more, right? So researchers and educators need to actually speak the same language with each other, and understand what are some of the questions and issues that both parties face. So if you were to ask me, is this bridge still too far? I would say that whilst there is a gap still, the gap is has narrowed significantly. All right. So this brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise them. And if you are ever in Singapore by any chance, please do let us know. We'll be very happy to entertain everyone. So thank you very much.